I don't think Asia Wilson helped things with her latest ESPN interview. Um, Basically, to me, and I'm not trying to be rude or anything, she just comes off insecure, like as if something is always against her. When really, if you were looking at this season, I would think she's only been praised. I mean, from the beginning of the year, all I ever heard was Asia Wilson is the MVP. And if you don't consider Asia Wilson the MVP and the best player in the world, something is wrong with you. You have an agenda. You're acting nefariously. That was hammered in our head from the beginning of the season. And there was also constantly this idea of she's not being recognized enough. She's not being recognized enough. She's not being recognized enough, to the point where I can't imagine you could possibly argue she hasn't been recognized enough, because simply by saying she hasn't been recognized enough over and over again was the recognition. And then people went out of their way to recognize her. And she deserves the recognition. She had a tremendous season, one of the best seasons in the history of the league. You could make an argument the best season in the history of the league. But mild critiques or not captivating the imagination like other players are not the world being against her. And, I think I've watched this season very closely. Asia is on the top tier of players. There's no question. But I don't really think there's a huge gap, or she's definitively better than the other players on that tier. I mean, she's going up against one of them right now in the Liberty, in Brianna Stewart. My first team all WNBA was Asia Wilson, Brianna Stewart, Nafisa Collier, Caitlin Clark, and Sabrina Ionescu. Right now, I think those are the best players in the league, and I don't think there's that much of a gap between any one of them. But in the latest ESPN interview, Asia starts off by discussing her experience as a Black woman, and how things are tougher for her as a Black woman. She has to do more. I cannot speak from the point of view of a Black woman. I can speak from the point of view of having covered sports and not necessarily seeing Black athletes in the NBA, at least, having trouble being elevated. In the WNBA, it's an interesting phenomenon, because in the NBA, there is not a large proportion of white American superstars. In fact, there's almost none. Since Larry Bird, I can't remember one. The white players who have been good, or the white skinned players who have been good, are Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic and players like that. But I've never heard fans say they're getting an advantage or anything like that. Maybe because they're not American. I just, in the WNBA, for whatever reason, there happens to be a higher percentage of elite white players, whether that be Stewie or Clark or Sabrina or Plum or, Tarazi. So I don't know how to explain that in a league that's basically, I think, 85% Black. So Asia's experiences are her own, and she is free to articulate them and feel the way she feels. I just don't see any of the players that are lumped into that group being elevated disproportionately to their abilities. They've all earned their abilities on the floor, or proven their abilities on the floor. And Clark is just such a unique phenomenon on her own, where I don't know how many different ways I can say it, but her popularity is not a result of the promotion. The promotion is a result of her popularity. Anyhow, Asia goes on to rebuke the claims that her game is boring, which is something that has come up this year. And she's gotten some Tim Duncan comparisons, maybe from Fever fans. I think I've made that comparison too, basically saying how Allen Iverson moved more shoes than Tim Duncan, even though Tim Duncan was the better player. And Asia is a terrific player. She runs the floor great. She's got an awesome mid-range shot. She's, around the rim. She gets multiple second opportunities. There's just a lot to love about her game. She's a rim protector, but she doesn't play the style that typically captivates the imagination. Usually those players have the ball in their hands to start. They're not being given the ball. And the Aces give Asia Wilson the ball a lot. She dominates the ball. She dominates the shot. She's taken almost 20 shots a game this year. So I don't If she doesn't like being called boring, I understand. No one would want to be called that. But there is also, I think, a natural reason why fans don't gravitate to her game in necessarily the same way as some other players, playmakers, ball handlers, players that are setting up themselves and others, shooting from deep, driving the lane, all those things. But then there was one little bit of the interview that I thought was particularly problematic. And it was this statement about the fans, talking about, how exhausting it had been. And this one line, I dreaded being in Indiana, not just because it was like the city or nothing. It was just like, I don't want no shit to pop off. And she was very vague about the rest of the description there. But the implication is there was a fear of the Fever fan base, or the behavior or the conduct of the Fever fan base. And I'm sorry, the WNBA players need to stop painting broad brushes with Fever fans, or any fan base for that matter. I mean, these are sporting events. The vast majority of the people in that building are there to support their team. They're bringing their kids, they're bringing their girlfriend or boyfriend. They're having a good time. They're not there to cause any ugliness or anything, like the vast majority. And when you have all these new fans coming in and you repeatedly attack them and insult them based on the actions of a fringe minority, I just don't think it's helpful for the progress of the league or for your popularity and your likability individually, which you're complaining about otherwise in this interview. And then I also think there's an unfair labeling that's happening here to the black fans who support Clark and the Fever, because so much of these implications are being made black and white, when a lot of black fans, a lot of NBA fans, black and white and everything in between, have come over to watch because of Caitlin Clark. It's just organic. And so many of, or many of Clark's biggest supporters happen to be black. And it's not fair to any group of people to apply what an individual does and label that what everybody does. That goes for, white people, Indian people, Asian people, black people, lesbian people, straight people, so on and so forth. And that goes for a fan base like the Fever fans. And if we're just going to keep banging our heads into the door about Fever fans all year long, Asia, you're playing right now. I mean, the conversation has been about everything but what's going on the basketball court. And Asia Wilson is still playing. Probably not for long, but she's still playing for the time being. And I think that's the best way. Everyone's always free to speak their mind. Even if I disagree, it's okay. You can speak. I can have my opinion on what you say. But I don't think this helps the perception of her play or her brand as a whole, which is something that's also been kind of talked about as if it's been put on the back burner. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I see it. I didn't think